Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for tuning in. This week's vlog is a little roundup of OCC. So many of you guys have asked me a billion questions about the race, the lead up to it, how I'm recovering, so I want to talk through all of that kind of stuff. I realised during the race I was so knackered that I wasn't saying everything that was going through my head, so I was like looking back over the footage and I was like, I'm pretty sure I said that. And then I realised I just thought that, and then I was so tired that I just never actually spoke it out to you guys. But the vlog was long enough, so I thought I'd do a separate vlog about the race and how I'm recovering from it and what is next, as well as some slightly less good medical results that I've got back, but finally getting to the bottom of my health issues that I've had this year, which is really good, and it's nice to have a diagnosis, which I will talk about later in this vlog. So leading up to the race, for those of you who don't know, I'd had a few months of on-off health issues, things like heart palpitations back in February, March kind of time in the lead up to a 100k race that I was doing in the Lake District. I then DNF'd the Lakes Traverse because I wasn't sufficiently trained, because I hadn't been able to do a lot of my training because of the heart palpitations, and I was suffering from quite a lot of fatigue back then, and like just a lot of kind of minor but weird symptoms, and I could just tell that something was up. And I had gone to the doctor about all of it, and obviously when you apply to any of the UTMB races you have to be signed off by a medical professional. So I'd had an ECG done, I've had an echocardiogram done, I'd had full bloods done multiple times. What else? Like blood pressure, you know, all the usual stuff, and all of it had come back clear, other than, you know, a couple of like minor things that are very easy to take, just, you know, vitamins and whatnot. Nothing that suggested that I wasn't able to do the race. But I did have a couple of people saying like, maybe you shouldn't do the race. Being in the mountains is, you know, dangerous in and of itself, although of course the support around the UTMB course is excellent. It is still a mountain race and you have to respect the mountains. So I basically went into that week weighing up whether or not I was even going to start the race, because I don't want to be a burden on race support, I don't want to be a burden on the volunteers there or the other racers who might have to stop if something did happen. But equally, it's not very fun, and I do this for fun. So if there was a chance of me not even being able to get past 10 kilometers, then I didn't want to do the race, because actually, what's the point? It's just a long day out and a lot of stress for not that much gain, especially if there's something wrong with the body and you need to rest. So I had this prerequisite before the race that if my resting heart rate and my heart rate variability were a-okay, then I could do the race, because that means that I'm well rested going into it. But if they were all a little bit off and it kind of, my stats were starting to look like I was getting ill or fatigued, then I wouldn't do the race, and I would DNS rather than potentially DNFing later. And that, I think, was a good kind of mindset to have going in. And it also took a lot of pressure off the race as well, because I knew that I wasn't going to be able to perform the way that I wanted to, and looking at my race and the times and all that kind of stuff, I know that I'm capable of so much more than that on a good year, but this is not a good year, and kind of knowing that actually I may not even finish the race took all the pressure off trying to perform really well. And so going into the race I was anxious and stressed, and there was a lot of unknowns, but equally I was also really well rested. Before heading to Chamonix I had 4 days down in Avignon in the south of France, and I literally did nothing, which I wouldn't usually suggest in taper week. I still like to kind of do some runs here and there and make sure that my legs keep moving, but other than 2 5k completely flat runs, I did absolutely nothing in the week leading up to the race, and I think actually that was exactly what I needed. I actually arrived in Chamonix feeling really nicely rested and decided to take on the race that morning. Well, I decided to take on the race basically the night before, and I woke up that morning at 5 o'clock or just before 5 and felt kind of surprisingly okay, especially for a 5 o'clock start. So I got in the transport to the race, was super nervous on the start line, but just kind of was like, well, I'll just get as far into the race as I can. I honestly was not expecting to finish. I had told everyone that I would be getting to an aid station where it was possible for me to get public transport back to Chamonix. So I know the public transport in Chamonix. There were lots of aid stations where that would be possible, and I wasn't particularly worried about getting to the end at all, ever. And I don't think that's a defeatist mindset. I knew how my body was feeling in the lead up to that race, and I just wanted to manage my own expectations of myself, because as an ultra runner and as a very stubborn person, I'm a Taurus, I really knew that if I put myself out there to finish, then I would push through all sorts of things that I shouldn't necessarily push through to get to the end. So I tried not to do that and set off on the race very, 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 very slowly, because my heart rate was doing all sorts of weird things. Granted, we were at elevation a little bit, so we were like between 800 and 1,000 meters, which does affect your heart rate a little bit, even at a gentle jog. The first 10 kilometers was just trying to settle into a pace, kind of find my rhythm a little bit. I hadn't been doing that much running in the lead up to the race, and I don't know about you guys, but if I spend some time off running, like when I get back to it, it feels a little bit bizarre. So I was just plodding along nice and slowly, sipping lots of electrolytes, having my tailwind, so I was getting some calories in from the very beginning, and just trying to settle in to a rhythm that was going to be able to take me through as much of the race as possible. I'm not gonna lie, I felt truly horrendous at the beginning. My heart rate was spiking at around 180 BPM, which is well into zone 4 for me, and this is at like a 6:30 per kilometer jog. I was feeling completely gassed. Anything that was a slight incline, I was walking, but that wasn't really a problem for me, because I knew that going into it that it wasn't going to be a case of racing as much as possible. So I ran when I could and I walked when I had to, and that was a lot of walking. And I actually got the splits, which I'll show you here, for the whole race. And you can see it's just over half of the race is walking. And that's actually, I think, not too bad. There's a lot of hills. It is the Alps, so it's very mountainous. There's no way for a runner of my level to run most of the mountains. So there's a lot of hiking involved, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, because I did actually practice that quite a lot in the lead up to the race. A lot of hiking involved, and just running where you're able to, basically. And since the race finishes like 200 meters above where it started, there's slightly more going up than there is going down. So I think that split of walking to running kind of makes a lot of sense. But I wasn't too unhappy about walking that much near the beginning. And by the first checkpoint, I was around 1,000th in the pack of 1,700 runners. So it kind of shows I was still mid-pack, but I was going pretty slowly, especially as I started relatively near the front in the first wave. My strategy was basically to start slow and get slower, and eat as much as possible, walk when I needed to, rest a lot at aid stations, kind of take stock of how my body was feeling. So it makes a lot more sense to stop at aid stations rather than going back out into the mountains and either having to then hike back down the way that you've come, or have someone come and rescue you, which is obviously, unless you're in a kind of horrible situation, sort of a no-go on race day. So I was just resting loads at the aid stations and making sure to eat as much as possible, really. But if you watch the vlog, you'll see I was kind of struggling with eating between 10 and 30 kilometers, because it was heating up quite a lot, and the temperature does affect your ability to eat. I don't usually get that affected by temperature, but back in UTS, back in May, where I did the 25 kilometer UTS Ultra Trail Snowdonia in Aurori, I basically got heat exhaustion in that as well, which is really unusual for me. It was like 27 degrees, and for OCC it was about 25 degrees. I think this is something to do with the health issues that I've been having, is that my body's less able to deal with the extra stress of a slightly elevated temperature, which was then really affecting my ability to eat, and it did back in UTS as well, hence sitting in all the rivers. And I didn't realise until afterwards I was suffering from heat exhaustion, otherwise I might have gone a little bit slower. But yeah, you know, you start to get headaches, you start to feel sick, you start to get a little bit dizzy, and I sat in a lot of rivers at UTS. This time it wasn't nearly as bad as that, because with the mountain air, you know, as you climb, even though you're putting in a lot of effort, the temperature cools by about a degree per 100 meters that you're climbing, I think. So by the time we got to the top, it was really freezing. So I cooled down pretty quickly, and then I could eat again. And at every aid station, I was topping up the calories that I wasn't able to eat whilst I was running. So I was thinking a lot about it, and I was making sure that each time I left an aid station, it was safe to do so, and I was in an okay state. I topped up my water, I topped up my hydration electrolytes. I wasn't being stupid, basically, because I think there is in ultra running, in sports in general, this kind of slightly macho attitude of like, I will get to the end at any cost, and I think that can be really dangerous and also detrimental, and I am pretty determined not to be like that. So please don't think that I went into this race being like, I'm gonna get to the end, because I never actually thought that I could. But I had a strategy for dealing with if I wasn't able to. There was a lot of thought that went into it. I still don't know if doing the race was even the right thing to do, but I'm so happy I did it, because as you will see, as the race went on, I actually started to feel a little bit better. So coming down from Col de Balme, the first bit of the descent, I did not feel good at all. My quads were just like feeling like my legs weren't really working. They just hadn't woken up yet, which is, you know, it's a considerable way into the race. And I felt like I'd run a really long distance, but my legs were completely dead. And then we started descending a little bit more, and I started to get in the flow of it. I mean, it's just gravity, right? You just have to keep your legs moving. And that's such a long, beautiful descent, and I was just having a great time. So once my body started to warm up a little bit into that, my brain was kind of like, oh yeah, I remember what we're supposed to be doing. This is fun, this is supposed to be fun. So I kind of started warming up into the race after like 35 kilometers, and I got to Argentière at 40 something, about a marathon in, and I had actually thought about stopping at Argentière. My friend was there. I know that there's travel back into Chamonix on the buses. No one would have to come and collect me. It's minimum liability for anyone. Getting to 40 plus kilometers was more than I ever could have hoped for. And then at Argentière, I realized that the climb that I thought we were doing was actually not the climb that we were doing at all, and we were doing a much shorter 5-kilometer climb rather than the 8-kilometer climb or 7-kilometer climb that I thought we were doing. I thought we were going up to, if anyone knows it around there, I thought we were going up to Tête au Vent and then traversing across there, which is a beautiful climb, but very, very technical, very steep, a lot of switchbacks, very exposed, and just completely and utterly exhausting. And then means that you've also got that long technical traverse and then a really nice, beautiful downhill, which we did end up doing. But instead what we did is just cut straight up to Flagey, up the ski slope, which again, very steep, very exposed, but at least only 5 kilometers of going uphill. And beyond that point, I knew that it was all downhill. So I left Argentière thinking, well, it's only about 10 or 11 kilometers, 12 kilometers to get back to the end, and I could do that in my sleep. And I was actually feeling significantly better at 44 kilometers than I did at 10 kilometers in. So I thought, well, actually, if I'm getting better through the race, then getting to the end is probably going to make me feel so much better. And also psychologically speaking, I kept envisaging myself finishing and getting really emotional about it, like I am now, because, oh my God, because going into the race, I never thought that I was even going to be able to start it, let alone finish it. So getting to that point, I realised like how much I really did actually want to finish the race, and how much work had gone into even getting myself to that start line, even with all the health issues that I'd had. So I decided basically to give it a go, and I left Argentière with my friend Chrissy, who gave me a couple of gels because I'd run out of food by this point, to get me to the end. And basically I just kept going and got up to Flagey, and Flagey to Chamonix I know like the back of my hand, but it is a very, very, very tough descent, at least straight down from Flagey. It goes straight down like this, and that is where my IT bands went. And IT band syndrome is a bitch. It really hurts. It's killer. I had it in the past for about 6 years. It kind of stopped me running like on and off. I was able to run a bit, and then I'd run too much, and then I'd get IT band syndrome flare up, and then I'd have to stop a little bit and then I'd get back to it. And eventually I did fix the problem. I get asked how all the time, and I'm kind of slightly reluctant to give personalised advice because, of course, your IT band syndrome might be different to my IT band syndrome. But the things that worked for me was basically increasing my cadence, so taking slightly shorter strides, and increasing my glute strength and basically general leg strength. Once I clocked that the pain was just due to IT band syndrome, although it is very painful, running 7 kilometers of it on it is not going to cause any permanent damage. Nothing's going to pop, I think, at least in the 6 years that I've had it. It's a pain that I understand. I know that it gets too painful to run before anything really bad happens. So I knew that I was able to get to the end, even if it was excruciatingly painful. It was very, very unpleasant, and not at all the problem that I thought was going to end my race, let alone so close to the end. Anyway, I didn't let it end the race, obviously, and as soon as I got onto the flat in Chamonix, I was absolutely fine. It was just that descent that was super painful, and I did actually think I'd be okay by the next day, but it took me like 3 days to stop feeling pain in my knees, which shows how much I was hammering that downhill. Even though I was going pretty slowly compared to how fast I would usually do that, I was still overtaking people, and looking back over the aid station data, I was overtaking people the whole race. So like I said, at the first checkpoint I was in around 1,000th position, and by the time I finished I was in 600th and something. You know, nothing crazy, but still that did mean that I was overtaking throughout the race, and that corresponds to how I was feeling as well, getting better and better and kind of warming up into the race throughout the race, despite the fact that I was obviously super tired, which I think is a testament to the training that I've done, which has been, albeit slightly terrible in recent months, at least consistent over the space of this year. I have had some weeks, some months of really, really good training and very consistent training, and even in my worst weeks as well, I've been able to get out there for a lot of base building, a lot of zone 2 training. So I got to the finish. It was very emotional, as you guys will have seen. I apologise for everyone I made cry. I mean, even literally just thinking about it and even looking at the photos makes me really emotional. And that's not because, you know, it's not for any reason other than, well, mainly sheer relief at getting to the end, but also just thinking about everything that had gone into doing that race and the decisions that I'd made to be there, and the doubt and anxiety that I'd had going into it all just suddenly being released at once and getting the result that I wanted, which was basically to finish. I mean, that was my A goal of the day. I set out A, B and C goals, and that was my A goal. I did not ever think that I was going to be able to achieve that. So as you can imagine, I'm completely delighted that I did, and I was on a high for about 4 days afterwards. I was waiting for the crash, the energy crash to come, and it didn't come for about 4 or 5 days. And I just think that's because I was in such a good mood. I was just on cloud 9 after I finished, because more so than any other race, it just meant the world to me to be able to finish. So recovery wise, like I said, it took me a few days to start feeling a little bit tired, but I was very cautious in that time, other than the Friday where I was still in Chamonix and I did like 20,000 steps or something. Just I had meetings, I had lots of people that I wanted to see. I was testing out all the different foods in Chamonix to kind of create this review of the best vegan restaurants and cafes in Chamonix. So I had a job to do, and that was eating a lot of food. So I was still super busy on that Friday, but as soon as I got back to the UK on the Saturday, it was just time for rest. And for me, that is basically a lot of listening to my body, making sure that I am not excessively moving about, you know, never mind just not running, also not doing 20,000 steps, walking the dog or walking to the shops or whatever it may be, because your body can't differentiate between the exercise of going for an easy run and just being on your feet all day. You know, it's all stress on the body. So I was really cautious to kind of do the bare minimum and allow my body time to recover, even if at the very beginning it didn't actually felt like I needed that much time to recover. It has since hit me, and I've spent a lot of time sleeping. I have spent a lot of time just sort of plodding around the place, pottering in the garden like an 8-year-old, and sleeping loads as well. I've been having daytime naps. And of course, the irony is that after you do a big race, you don't sleep very well that night. So you're trying to catch up on the lack of sleep in the lead up to the race from the anxiety and then the early morning, and then you do the race and your body won't let you sleep again because your stress levels are up, your cortisol is high, you've got loads of adrenaline, loads of also happy hormones from having finished the race. So you're basically on crack, and your body is just saying like, no, let's go and do things, even if you're completely shattered. So I didn't get to sleep until 1 a.m. or something the night of the race, despite having been up before 5 a.m. and having done this incredible 9 hours of running up mountains. So I then still had quite a lot of sleep to catch up on after that. So since then I've been just allowing my body to sleep basically whenever it wants. And I had planned to take some holiday quote unquote. I wasn't really working very much in the week after the race because I wasn't entirely sure how it was going to affect me physically but also mentally. So I wanted to allow myself some space to rest and recover afterwards. And I appreciate that not everyone is necessarily able to take that time, but if you are, even if you just sort of can put in a day or two into your calendar to have some R&R, then I would thoroughly recommend that. Things that went well in the race. I was very happy with my hiking, and the days after the race, my muscle DOMs, delayed onset muscle soreness, was significantly less bad than I was expecting. And I would put that down to Project BAM. If you guys remember Project BAM, it was started after I DNF'd from the Lakes Traverse 100k back in April, where I just wasn't significantly hill trained. I did not want that to happen going into any of my future races, so I started doing, I mean, there were loads of different elements of it, but one of the elements was incorporating hills into basically every aspect of my life. So, you know, all of my dog walks were up and down the local hill, doing hiking on the treadmill at a high percentage, going on the Stairmaster and hiking on that as well, incorporating hills into my long runs, making sure that I had done some big days on the hills in the lead up to all of my races. And my week in Chamonix on the Trails and Routes camp definitely helped more than I think anything else, because even just going into Chamonix, understanding that my body can cope with the altitude and my body can cope with going up and down hills a little bit. And that was a month before the race, so that was just perfect timing to be able to kind of assimilate that training in time for the race. So going into the race, even though I hadn't done as much hill training as I had wanted on my runs, my body was well adapted to the hills, and I'd done a load of strength training to basically make sure that my quads could handle the descents, because they are brutal. I mean, it's 3 big mountains plus a little mini one at the beginning, so the amount of climbing and descending that you're doing is significantly more than you can ever do here in the UK, really. And I didn't hurt really, other than my IT band, but I think that's not really to do with my muscles, so I'm pretty happy with that. So that's really good. Project BAM was a win, and I will be doing more of that in the lead up to any future races that I do. I kept a consistent pace. On the tracker, my idle time was just over 5 minutes, which is crazy. I know I said I was going to wait around at aid stations to kind of do a body check and make sure that I was feeling okay, but actually in the end I kind of grabbed food, filled up my water, and I walked out, and that allowed me enough time to kind of think about how I was feeling, but without actually stopping, because I kind of knew that if I sat down, I was maybe not going to be getting back up again. So I didn't sit down. Other than that one time going up the mountain, I didn't sit down at all during the race. I literally grabbed stuff and I went. So yeah, I didn't spend very much time sitting still or anything, so I was keeping a really consistent pace, which is better than I've ever done in any race before, so I'm really happy with that. My kit was all brilliant. I'm really happy with it. Just to run through it quickly, I had an X Bionic top, which is like a short sleeve top but with quite long sleeves, so you don't get any chafing and it keeps you cool when it is very warm, which it was. I had Allbirds cycling shorts, which are the perfect length. They're not necessarily meant for ultra running, but they're not meant for cycling, it's just cycling short length and style. I roll them up a little bit, but when it gets cold I can roll them down and they keep me a little bit warmer. I was wearing the Hoka Mafate Speed 4 for the race, which I adore. I don't think they're their racing shoes. They're quite a stable shoe. They're brilliant for training. They've got a lot of cushioning. They don't have a huge amount of grip, but they're perfect for alpine trails, and I've worn them in all my training, which is why I wore them in the race. Even though they're slightly heavier than their Speed Goats, I just, you know, use what you know and love. I used Lecky poles, which were delightful. I kind of kept them out once they were out. I didn't bother putting them away again, but I did have a Compress Sport belt, so I could put the poles in the belt at the very beginning, so I wasn't running with poles out from the start. I wore my Columbia 7-litre pack, which I've had for, I don't know, maybe 4 years now. It is starting to break, and I don't think they sell it anymore, which is a real shame because it's a brilliant pack and I adore it, and I will be looking for something similar. I think they might sell it in the black still, but not in the beautiful blue kind of teal colour. With 2 500 milliliter flasks in the front, one with Tailwind and one with Active Root electrolyte powder. I wore the Sun God Ultras, which loads of people have asked me about, but anyone who has followed me for a while will know that that is just always what I wear. I think they're brilliant, they don't bounce, and they're super comfy, and they look good, I think. When I got to the top of Col de Balme, I put on my Non-Stop Dogwear waterproof. It's a tape seams waterproof. I think it is the lightest waterproof in the world, at least the lightest tape seams waterproof in the world, and it kept me warm. It wasn't raining, but it kept me really nice and warm when it was seriously windy at the top and just freezing winds at that. So that was part of mandatory kit, and I'm really happy I had it with me, because had I stopped there, I would have had to put on all the different layers that I had with me. That's a good windbreaker as well as waterproof. It is not cheap at all. but it packs down to about this big and it's just absolutely brilliant. I really like it. I really, really rate it. So yeah, my kit was brilliant and I didn't have a single problem with any element of that. So if you guys are looking for similar things, that's the list of those. Things to improve, I did get really tired of sweet foods really early on. And I think that was partly because of the heat and my body just wasn't wanting food at all, was actually just maybe if it did want anything, it was wanting something savoury and salty. So when I got to the aid stations, I topped up on crackers, salty crackers basically, and that was really good. And for some reason, that's happened to me before, and for some reason I didn't think to bring savoury food. So in future, I will bring savoury food with me because you don't know what your body's going to necessarily want on the day. I think if we listen to our bodies, it tells us what it needs, and in this case what it needed was savoury food and salt rather than more sugar, more carbohydrates. Obviously carbohydrates it does always need, but I think in future bring a variety of foods. I don't think I brought enough electrolytes, but thankfully they had NAC, N-A-A-K, at the aid stations, and I've had that before and I really like it. So it's basically kind of similar to Tailwind, I think, and they've got like a lime flavour and a watermelon flavour, and I put that in my hydration in one of my 500ml soft flasks, and that I think perked me up no end when I'd run out of my Tailwind and my active route. So I'm really happy with that. It was warmer than I expected, so I needed more hydration than I expected, and I did run out of water between two of the aid stations. So that goes to show, like, don't underestimate how hot it can get, even if it's just in the low to mid 20s. It does feel very warm, especially if you're not trained for that heat. So that's all of that. That's the race. I'm absolutely delighted that I finished it. I just did not expect it at all. And maybe other people did, but other people did not necessarily know what was going on with me in the lead up. So I wanted to just talk through that because I basically have decided to pull out of the Tribe Run for Love race run that's going on next week. And the reason for that is that I received a positive EBV result, Epstein-Barr virus, which I've been speaking to the very, very good doctor, Renee McGregor, who is like an exercise physiologist, specialises in female athletes, and she suggested a few weeks ago that I might have EBV, hence not knowing whether or not I should do the OCC race. But with that positive diagnosis, I decided to go ahead with that, but I have now received a positive diagnosis of EBV, and basically it causes fatigue. It's also the virus that causes glandular fever, or for you US people, I think you call it mono. It's not something to be taken lightly because if you push through it consistently, it causes chronic fatigue and can be really, really debilitating. I haven't had a full-on doctor's appointment about this yet. I've only just received the results, but it makes complete sense. It also explains my heart palpitations that I had back in February, March time. I was looking back through some messages and I'd been messaging my old coach Holly, asking her, you know, whether she'd experienced this level of fatigue before. I was really, really struggling, and she mentioned EBV back in February. So it is really common in athletes, and especially young athletes. I'm a little bit old actually to get it, but apparently a lot of like teenage athletes get it, and it can be really debilitating, especially if you push through it. So the doctor's orders now is to rest for the next 6 to 12 weeks. So obviously racing 250 kilometers through Sweden is not allowed, which is really gutting for me actually, because I was so looking forward to that. And because it's not a race, I knew I could take it really easy, but I'm limited to under 1 hour of exercise at a time, and nothing pushing my body, nothing intense. And unfortunately, no matter how easy I take it, running 45 to 60 kilometers a day is never going to feel easy on the body. So the most sensible decision is to pull out, and it's a really heartbreaking decision for me because I was so looking forward to it, and I know some of you guys have also donated to the charity. So it's sad. It's really sad for me, and I feel bad for Tribe as well because they need all the help they can get with the charity, and oh, I was just so looking forward to it, but health has to come first. It always has to come first, and especially off the back of OCC. I know that my body is still not fully recovered, and if there's one thing that I have found since I started feeling this fatigue, it's that doing exercise off the back of fatigue basically just compounds the issue, and my body just completely overreacts to it, and I put myself in an energy hole basically where it takes me weeks, or at the very least days and days and days, to start to feel like myself again. And just so that you guys know how long I have been dealing with this, they think it is from the illness I got, or something to do with the illness I got back in December, where I had a fever for about 2 weeks, on and off for 2 weeks, but a very high fever. I sent a message to someone in February saying that I felt I still hadn't recovered from the illness that I had back in December, and that's what, 7 months? So years, nearly 8 months now. And that is a really long time to be feeling this way, and at this point I just want to do whatever I can to get rid of it. So the doctor's orders so far are rest, you can still run, but make sure it's low zone 2 or zone 1 running. So thank goodness for all of my base training, because my zone 2 running is coming along really well. I can do strength training, I can do hiking, but basically just rest, and eat loads. So that is what I'm doing, and I really do have to put health first, because the longer I push this, the longer it's going to take me to come out the other side. But I will let you guys know when I have more information. I have a doctor's appointment tomorrow. I just want to let you guys know because obviously I'm supposed to be heading out to Sweden, and that should have been my next vlog or the one after that. So I want to let you guys know because obviously you have a right to know when my plans change. So I'll be dealing with this over the next few months, probably 3 months before I can start properly picking up the training again. But on the plus side, zone 2 training is very good for you, and you can't really over base train. So it's a good, I guess, a good exercise in discipline. Not discipline of how often you can get out there, how hard you can push your body, but discipline of how much you can rest and how much you can listen to your body. And I think sometimes us ultra runners need a little bit of that kind of reminder to ourselves. So yeah, that's it for this week's vlog. I hope you enjoyed it. It's obviously not the news that I wanted to hear. It's probably not the news that you guys wanted to hear either. But it's not the end of the world. People do recover from it. It's not going to kill me. So it just will make me very, very tired, which is nothing new at this stage. And in all honesty, it's just nice to have a diagnosis. I did spend a bit of time thinking that I'd gone mad when I had all those ECGs and heart, you know, examinations, and I was having these heart palpitations, and they were saying there's nothing wrong with you, and there's nothing wrong with your bloods, and there's nothing wrong with anything else, so kind of get over it. So it's nice to have a diagnosis. And I just want to give a shout out also to Fourth Edge, who sent some blood tests, private blood tests, so you can just get them delivered to your door. I'm not sponsored by them or anything, but they did send them, they gifted them to me, and they showed up a high level of prolactin, which basically shows that your body is under stress, and they showed that back in April, but apparently you can get it also from being afraid of pricking your fingers to get the blood test done. So I waited, and then I got it tested again in August, and it was even higher in August. So chronically high prolactin levels shows stress in the body, and that was the reason that I went back to the doctor and said, look, I still think there's something wrong, and that was the reason that I got this diagnosis, along with Renee McGregor as well. So I just want to say, if you feel like something is wrong, get it checked out, because even if the doctors tell you that there is nothing wrong, I think we are hyper aware of our bodies and hypersensitive to changes in our bodies as runners and as athletes. So we do actually know when something goes wrong. And I'm not saying like, you know, be a hypochondriac about it, but I think I went a little bit too far the other way and just thought I was being a bit of a coward with my training, and, you know, this is just what it takes to be a good athlete. And it turns out I was just pushing my body in a way that was not good for it and that was causing further damage. So if you feel like something's wrong, go to the doctor and insist on getting screened for whatever, because I'm glad that I did, because now I have answers and now I can do something about it, which is the important thing. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy it, please do give it a thumbs up and hit the subscribe button. Come and find me over on Instagram as well, because I'll be talking a lot more about it over on there in between these vlogs. But I will be back running and I will be sharing more vlogs. Don't worry, I'm not going anywhere. I will still be training as and when I'm able to. And you know, with COVID and everything, fatigue is so common among people. So hopefully this is relevant to a lot of you guys, even if you don't have EBV or haven't been diagnosed with it or anything. Like, the training I think is quite relevant. I'll be talking a lot about zone 2 training, which is not sexy, but it is good. So anyway, thanks again for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!